Wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone for joining today. We have quite the turnout, you might see a few people rolling in, but just to get us all started, welcome to today's online learning session, The Power of Partnerships BC Builds program. My name is Nathika, and I am the education programmer here at BC and PHA, and I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming all of you on behalf of my organization. Before we do get started, though, we would like to acknowledge that BC and PHA's offices are located on the unceded traditional Coast Salish territories of the Squamish,
So this is
Tsleil-Waututh.
just you in the background, sorry.
Good, no worries. Our work takes place throughout the ancestral lands and unceded territories of about 198 distinct First Nations in BC. We acknowledge that each of you are coming today to this session virtually from ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples across the province, each with their own unique traditions and history. I welcome you to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're engaging from today. Um, Beyond that, a few housekeeping items on our end as well. I'd like you all to note that this session is being recorded and we will send out a link of the recording to all registered participants. It should take a couple of days after the event and you will be provided with the resources you need. Should you need any support throughout this session, please feel free to send me a message in the chat. I'll be happy to assist you. You are encouraged to participate and engage with the content how it best fits you. Please use the chat function to engage with us and others in the chat as you like. Before handing it over to our presenter today, Lisa Helps, I would like to offer thanks to BC Housing for partnering with us on this session. So Lisa, whenever you're ready, I'd love to hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introduction and for setting the stage so well for all of us. I'm here on the homelands of the Lekwungen speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, just, really want to acknowledge and hold my hands up to the nations of this place who have stewarded these lands and taken care of them so that we are able to still have a good place to live today. And also, province-wide, wherever we are in the province and wherever we're building housing in the province, we're building on land that has been stewarded for generations by First Nations. And in many cases, housing is an opportunity for reconciliation and for working differently together on land. So I'm going to walk through my presentation here. Some of you may have seen it already in various places around the province, and for some of you it may be new. I'm going to do a bit more of a detailed presentation than I usually do because of the interest in the sector and because really the BC Builds public stream is focused on the community housing sector. So I want to make sure that everyone here has a good understanding of the program. Having said that, we do have an hour together, so I want to make sure that I leave lots of time for your questions and comments. So if we can go to the next slide, it just says I'm going to tell you about BC Builds. So let's go to the next slide so I can begin to do that. So BC Builds is a new program launched by the government of British Columbia and housed at BC Housing. And I like to think of BC Builds as a small startup within BC Housing, and tremendously glad for the support of the entire organization in helping us to launch this program. And the thrust of BC Builds is really to speed up the development of new homes for middle income people. And I'm going to define that a bit more clearly later in the presentation. But basically, BC Builds begins where the rest of the BC housing programs leave off. So the Indigenous Housing Fund, Community Housing Fund, Supportive Housing Fund, Complex Care, Heart and Heart, all the good work that BC Housing is doing continues. And BC Builds is it's an addition. And the reason that BC Builds has been added to the housing ecosystem through BC Housing and by the government is to address the cost of construction right now. The cost of construction, the cost of borrowing, the cost of land, the cost of labor, and even for middle income households that earn a half-decent salary, they're finding it difficult to find places to rent in the communities where they live and work. And what that's doing, as you're all aware, is putting pressure on the rest of the rental sector, because the people who can pay more money for housing, if there were that housing available, are living in units that might be better suited for people on a lower moderate income. So BC Builds is really an intervention at the higher end of the housing ecosystem, meant to complement the work that's already happening. If we can go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about how BC Builds works, and then in the slides after this, I'm going to tell you who BC Builds works for. So BC Builds really is about getting underutilized land into development for housing. And underutilized land can be defined in a number of ways. Most commonly, when we think about underutilized land, we think about, oh, there's a bare piece of land, a parking lot, or a dirt field that's doing nothing. Let's build housing there. And certainly, those are the easiest opportunities to pursue. And so those are opportunities that we are pursuing. Secondly, there may be a housing development, a nonprofit development that was built in the 60s or 70s or 80s, low density townhomes that could be redeveloped into a much higher density site. So that's another example. And then the third example is partnering with municipalities or childcare providers or health authorities that may be considering building a one-story building. And we're saying, well, if you're going to build a one-story or two-story building, could we put housing on top? So that's kind of how we think about low-cost, underutilized land. The real thrust of our work, and to me the most exciting part, and the power of partnerships, as the presentation is titled, is bringing everybody together on projects in a bit of a different way. And I will show you how later in the presentation, and how we accelerate projects. But basically, we identify land, we bring everyone together, and then we also have the capacity to provide low interest financing and grants. I'll talk about the financing now, and then I'm going to talk about the grants in a few more slides, because I want to make sure that there's the nuance of how the grant program works comes across. So in terms of low cost financing for the nonprofit sector, we can provide low interest construction financing, so financing to get the building built, and then arranged takeout financing, again, at a below market rate on a 35-year basis. So that's the financing piece. We also are working on a relationship with the Government of Canada to be able to basically fast track BC Builds projects right into the new apartment construction loan program, where they're prioritized by BC Builds rather than competing with all the other projects across the country. So details on that still to come, but there is a $2 billion financing facility set aside by Canada. Next slide, please. Okay, so how BC Builds works for you. Of course, it depends on who the you is. So let's start, go to the next slide with renters. So BC Builds really is starting as a rental housing program. There will probably be a Pathways to Homeownership program developed, but for now we're starting with rental in some ways because it's the easiest, and also because there's just such a great need out there. Our ambition is to have thousands of homes under construction in partnership with all of you over the next few years, welcoming first residents into buildings by 2026. And again, I'll show you our acceleration process in just a moment. I want to stress here on the fourth bullet, the 20% of units at 20% below market. So as noted at the beginning, BC Builds is not exactly an affordable housing program in the way that we think about the rest of BC Housing's affordable housing program. But, and this is what I feel so excited about the program, why I feel privileged to get to work on it, BC Builds is a long-term investment in the community housing sector. So while at this point, when a BC Builds building opens, 80% of the units are at or near market, and 20% of the units are 20% below market, because the buildings are in the hands of the community housing sector, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, BC Builds buildings that are built today are really going to be the affordable housing stock of the future. And the best analogy that I have is co-ops. Everyone talks about how awesome it is to live in a co-op in Vancouver or elsewhere. So, affordable rent. No one wants to leave their co-ops. Who would? And when those co-ops were built in the 60s and 70s, they were market rents. People were working people, they paid market rents, and now all these years later, they've become affordable because they're in the hands of the community housing sector. So that's the approach that BC Builds is taking as well, not delivering affordable housing right out of the gate because we're targeting a different group, but in the hands of the community housing sector, because the sector is mission driven, those buildings will become more affordable in relation to market over time. And the who here, I'm sure you've read ahead of me, but the who are these folks like teachers, nurses, transit operators, construction workers, small business owners, civil servants, all the people who keep our communities running and working, but who are increasingly being priced out of them. And then the middle income limits are there. I'm not going to read them, but that's the target group. And that 84,780 starting point is where Hills, the housing income limits, leave off. So there's no gap. BC Builds comes in at the other end. All right, let's go to the next slide. BC Builds also works for all of you, government, nonprofit, and community landowners. So I touched on this a little bit already. The role of BC Builds is to help unlock underutilized land, help develop a vision, project goals, and timelines. And the timelines are really important. BC Builds projects need to move quickly, and I'll show you how and tell you why in a moment. We look for, as I already said, and I'll show you some examples, creative opportunities to add housing onto new infrastructure. And then this may not be as relevant for the nonprofit sector, although I saw as people were coming in, we do have some municipal folks here, municipalities that may have land and looking for a developer, builder, and building owner operator. BC Builds has the capacity to do some really interesting work there, and I encourage you all to stay tuned. There's some more very exciting information coming on this quite soon. So stay tuned to bcbuildshomes.ca on that last bullet. And then the who, this is just a sample list. We will work with anyone in the government, nonprofit, and community sector that wants to put their land into projects at low or nominal value to leverage it for housing. There also is a whole private stream for BC Builds where private landowners can access the interim construction financing in exchange for providing units that target those household incomes for a period of 10 years. But I'm focused today because of the context on the public stream. All right, let's go to the next slide. Third focus for BC Builds are nonprofit, First Nations, and private developers and housing operators. Again, the first bullet here kind of connects to the last bullet on the last slide, connecting nonprofits and developers to existing pre-zoned sites. And again, stay tuned, more coming very soon on that. Working with local governments who are fundamentally key partners for BC Builds to accelerate approvals, and then working collaboratively to remove barriers as they arrive. Our who is all listed here: First Nations DevCos, nonprofits, and also private residential developers. We know that we can't build housing without the private sector. They're a fundamentally important part of this. And now it comes to the grants. So I want to talk briefly about this because there have been lots of questions about how does this work? And I want to tell you how it works. So it says there up to $225,000 per unit for nonprofits, co-ops, and First Nations Development Corps. I've had many folks ask, how can I get how can I get the full grant amount per unit? The answer is that is not what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for, a really important point, the BC Builds mandate is, as I said earlier, 80% of units at or near market, and market for that area. So obviously the market in Oliver is very different than the market in downtown Vancouver. So obviously it's contextual to the local market. So 80% of units at or near market, and 20% of units at 20% below market. And so we calculate the grant into a project based on how much it will cost on a per unit basis to buy down 20% of the units to 20% below market. And that's how we calculate the grant amount. So on some projects, depending on the local circumstance, the cost of construction, et cetera, the grant amount might be $137,000 per unit to get 20% of the units to 20% below market. In another market, it might be $215,000 per unit. So that's how the grant amount is calculated. And then importantly, another question that we've received a lot, does that grant amount only apply to those 20% of units? No, it does not. The grant amount is on a per unit basis for the entire building. So if you're building 100 units, we need 20% of them to be 20% below market. Say it takes, $57,000 per unit to get there. That $57,000 is applied to all 100 units. Back up. All right. Perfect. Okay, excellent. Okay, so that's how the grants work. And happy to answer more questions about that. One more thing I'll say before we got a sneak peek of what the projects are, initial projects, just to give you a sample. One more thing about the grants. We've had lots of questions about, can we bring in other equity into projects, other funders, to make these BC Builds buildings more affordable? The answer to that is absolutely yes. Our equity, the grant amounts that I just talked about, go to bring down 20% of the units to 20% below market. If you've got other partners on projects, cities are sometimes bringing their housing accelerator funding from the federal government. Some projects are also applying to the Affordable Housing Fund through the federal government, formerly co-investment. Absolutely, yes, we can stack. But the BC Builds grant is that 20% at 20%. All right, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to have some water, and then I want to show you a few of our initial projects. And this is just a sample. These are the 3 that were announced when BC Builds was announced. Let's go to the next slide. We've got quite a few more projects than this underway right now. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but I just want to illustrate the power of partnerships on this one and the potential of BC Builds to help accelerate not only housing, but other community infrastructure. So this is a building in the city of North Vancouver, 3-story neighborhood house with 15 stories of housing on top. The land is owned by the city, and they currently have nearby this site a neighborhood house that's been providing services to their community for decades. It is an old building, and they need more space. And so they had originally planned to build a new neighborhood house in 2027, 2028. It was in their capital plan for that year. And then they heard, oh, BC Builds is here. Maybe we can accelerate our building, get it built sooner, and seize the opportunity to build housing on top. So we've been working really hard with the city of North Vancouver. They had identified Catalyst as their development partner already by the time that BC Builds arrived. And so this is an example of could just be a neighborhood house, but it's also housing as well. Next slide. Really important to the program, and I know to the government and to BC Housing as a whole, BC Builds is also focused on reconciliation through housing development, and very deliberately partnering with First Nations and First Nations Development Corps to build housing both on and off reserve. Important point in this regard, it is still market housing and affordable to middle income households. And this project is a perfect example of that housing through reconciliation. So this is land owned by the Quatsin Development Corp and Cowichan tribes. It is on reserve land, but it's in downtown Duncan. And this is an opportunity for Cowichan to provide housing for their own members, but also for working people in Duncan. This building is another kind of model BC Builds project because it has housing above ground floor that's been reserved for Indigenous businesses, as well as the Cowichan tribes headquarters. So an example of using land to do more than just Indigenous businesses or just housing. It's that power of partnerships that can bring everything together. And the final example I'll show you on the next slide is to really demonstrate that BC Builds is working in all places across the province, large and small. This is in the town of Gibsons. It started off as just a piece of bare land owned by the town. It was going to be 36 units of housing. But then the mayor caught wind that there was a childcare fund available, and so we quickly applied for that. Well, the town did with the support of the project team, and was successful in achieving childcare funding. So that has helped to fill out the capital budget. And so now this project we only lost 3 units by adding 24 childcare spaces, so 33 units of housing above childcare. And this project and the one in the city of North Vancouver both incorporate childcare. And I really love all sorts of things, the sustainability element, but the community building element when, instead of being carted off in a car to childcare, or, parents rushing around to take their kid to childcare and then get to work, they just need to take the elevator downstairs and drop their kid off at childcare, which is in the same literal building footprint as where they live. So there's a really kind of community building spirit to some of these projects. Next slide. All right, now I'm going to tell you about my real favorite part of the program. And I can't say enough about all the projects we're working on and how people have really embraced the BC Builds difference, I guess it's called on that slide. But what I like to think of is as the BC Builds rocket ship. Let's go to the next slide. So in addition to everything that I've said about who BC Builds is for and what it's meant to do, the how is really important. Unlike the conventional pre-development process, which is outlined up there at the top, where everything happens in a linear fashion, we get the land and then we do a feasibility, then we build the partnerships, then we go through the approvals, then we get the financing, and then we start construction, and that takes between 3 and 5 years. With BC Builds, we put everything in at once, and it just is a coincidence that this turned out like a rocket ship with all those things as rocket fuel, but so it is. That's how it is. And our ambition and the way that we're working just with such joy, really, because there's such motivation with all our project partners to do this differently. Everything comes in at the beginning. So we identify the land, we start on the feasibility, we're building the partnerships, we're already working through the approvals process by the time we start, and working on putting financing together. In the middle there, you see project team. Each project is set up with a steering committee that's chaired by BC Builds and has everyone at the table who can remove obstacles along the way. So sometimes it's the mayor and city manager and head of planning and the nonprofit that's involved and the builder if they've been selected. Everyone sits around that table every 2 or 3 weeks, removes obstacles as they arise. We've committed at the outset to a timeline. All right, we've got to hit this BC Builds target of 12 to 18 months. When are we going to be under construction? And we work backwards from that. And so far, all of the projects we're working on are hitting. We haven't had anything under construction yet, but are poised to hit that 12 to 18 month construction period. And if not, and I think this is, I'm obviously an optimistic person. You probably can tell that just from the presentation, but we're going to have, if not, if we start to see lagging, we're going to have some really serious conversations about, the grants being contingent on being able to work quickly, because this 12 to 18 month timeline is what BC Builds as a program is going to be measured on. And so far so good. And there's just real energy and enthusiasm for moving quickly. And I feel optimistic that will continue. What's interesting, this is just an aside, but when the federal budget was announced a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was just last week, time flies, they announced Canada Builds, modeled very deliberately after BC Builds with this same project timeline, 12 to 18 months from concept to construction as a requirement. So I think the sector has the capacity, municipalities have the capacity, and it's really this project steering committee, this almost housing accelerator approach that's allowing us to not only work more quickly together, but saves people so much time outside of meetings because everything's happening in the meeting. So that might be a bit too much detail, but I'm often getting asked, well, how do you move quickly? How do you accelerate? And the answer in some ways is really good old-fashioned relationship and trust building that happens inside this rocket ship. That's it from me. Let's go to the next slide because it shows you how to contact us, info@bcbuildshomes.ca. We also have a website, which probably we should put on this slide as well, bcbuildshomes.ca. I guess it's kind of intuitive. And happy to answer your questions here as well. And thanks for joining.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa. We do have a couple of questions already starting out in the chats. I will ask folks to enter their questions there, or if you prefer to raise your hand and unmute, we can do that as well. But just to get us started off here, the first question is, can the grant be used towards land purchase?
That is a good question. Generally, no, because the whole thrust of BC Builds is that land is coming in to projects at zero or close to zero value. We can, however, so the grants can't be used for that, but there may be some circumstances we can provide low cost financing for land acquisition, but again, if we're going to be doing that, which is an authority that we have, the land needs to be acquired at below market value. So we can't provide grants for buying land. We can provide low cost financing for buying land. But not at market value. The whole premise of BC Builds is to try and cut construction costs, and one of the ways to do that is to have land coming in at below market or at nominal value.
Our next question, will the financing be available? Will the financing available be locked into pre-construction like CMHC COI, means no interest rate risk, or will the grant amount be finalized at takeout?
I will answer that question in just a moment. Could we unshare the screen so I can see some faces other than just mine?
Absolutely.
And can we, let's unpin me as well if possible.
You've got it.
There we go. All right, there's a room full of people. Yay. Okay, that's much better. So I think that there was kind of two questions that had come together a little bit. So the grant itself is provided upfront to help offset the cost of construction. That's the grant portion. The financing is not like CMHC's financing. It is interim construction financing at a certain rate that's available when the project is under construction. And then at project completion, we batch the mortgages just like the rest of the BC Housing Program works, and put them out to the market for looking for the best rates for that 35-year amortization. So we do not lock in interest rates like CMHC. However, as I noted, we are working through the details of a partnership with CMHC through the Apartment Construction Loan Program. In that case, and again, details still to be confirmed, BC Builds would put in the grants at the beginning of the project, and then the project would access that Apartment Construction Loan Program financing for both construction and the first 10 years, and that would be locked in through CMHC.
We have a lot more questions coming in. And again, if your preference is to unmute yourself and speak directly, please feel free. Our next question goes to ask, can this program be used to purchase turnkey units from a developer?
No. Not at this point. No, it really, the thrust is underutilized land to get into productive use for housing. If the developer's already built housing, there's already housing there. So yeah, it's really about the whole focus of the program is, you know, there are folks who are already building housing, and there's land that's already being used for housing. We're trying to cast a really lateral view and saying what other productive land, or what other, you know, relatively unproductive land could be used for housing.
All right, next question. Would churches and faith group owned land at no cost qualify for the BC Builds program?
Yes.
All right.
I was gonna say a but no, that was just a very short answer. The answer is yes. The program is aimed at government, community, and nonprofit landowners, and churches and faith groups are certainly part of that.
Love that, very direct. I see Taya. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You have your hand up. Please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you, and it's Tia, but close. So thank you so much for allowing me. I'm the chair of our housing committee for the city of Trail, and we have been working with BC Housing for our homelessness and, of course, our affordable housing and supportive housing here. But what's the process for us? Because we have no housing societies right now that are capable of taking on another project. And we know there is a massive need in our community. One local company has had 70 rental applications in a very small town. That's like 10% of the people that live in Trail are looking for housing as a rental. And I just, need what's the steps? Do we apply? Do we have to create a housing corporation as a city separately to do that? Do we have to go through, putting us in somewhere that could actually run it as a partnership? Because there aren't any housing societies that are capable in our community of taking it on right now.
Who manages the privately owned rental units, or are there any?
Just a couple of real estate outfits.
Okay, because I mean, there are a number of options, and so I guess, sorry, follow-up question. Does the city of Trail have land that it would be putting into this kind of project?
Yes, and that was something that we brought forward. We have, funding from some land sales that we can use into purchasing other lands as well, that we've been, looking at acquiring. So it's just, what's that next step for us?
Great question. I'll just share a little bit about an upcoming opportunity at a very high level.
Thank you.
When we kind of did engagement across the province to set up BC Builds, we heard very clearly, and not only from smaller places, but also from larger cities, we have land, we don't have any housing expertise, we don't have a nonprofit society. And so what we're doing, what we will be doing soon, is municipalities can pre-zone their land and then sign what we're calling a housing development opportunities agreement. Sounds like a complicated thing, but it's not, with BC Builds. And then we will put the site out and seek a development partner and a nonprofit partner. It will be kind of a province-wide approach. So in smaller places, the benefit might be that everyone across the province might be seeing this opportunity. So I think that's, and Tia, we're working with some very small places that are looking at taking this pathway. So I would say that email me first of all, because
Yes.
let's get Trail into the pipeline.
Thank
but
you.
I think that's the best opportunity if you're not sure who's going to build it and you're not sure who's going to operate it, but you have land and you can zone the land, get the land zoned for what you want, and then let's use that BC Builds pathway that will be more information coming on it soon to get, see what's out there, see what comes back.
And would it be, sorry, just to follow up to that, would you guys agree to a long-term lease on a separate,
Yes.
so let's say, so I don't know if you're familiar with Tech. Yeah, so Tech owns a ton of land in Trail. And so we were kind of like, well, if they would be willing to lease a bunch of that, if we didn't have much to offer, if we could negotiate a lease on something, is that something that we could even look at as well?
Like a long-term lease from Tech to the city to be counted as, and then the city would contribute that at nominal value. Yeah, a lease counts as ownership. And actually that reminds me to say, we're not expecting anyone to give away their land. This is really about keeping community lands in community hands for the long term. And all of the landowners that we've been talking with who are in the same position as the city of Trail, they have land, they don't know how to develop it, they don't have the capacity to develop it. What we're recommending, unless they want to give their land away, is structuring the deal as a long-term lease with a nonprofit operator. So, and that's totally fine. 60 years is the minimum. 99 years is, I guess, well, there is no maximum, but we're 60 to 99-year lease. And that allows, if the city owns the land or the church owns the land or whomever owns the land, that allows the nonprofit society to be the owner and operator of the building and to be eligible for mortgage financing. From a financer's point of view, a long-term lease kind of counts as ownership, except you're not giving your land away.
Thank you so much for your question there, Tia. I see Blair, you have your hand up. Please feel free to go ahead. You are on mute.
There we go. Thanks very much. We're out in Lake Country here. We don't own any land, but I've been working with a couple of church groups to try to get them. They want to do it, but they really need somebody to middleman to get them to that point, right? They're nervous, they're scared, they don't know where that's going to go. We may have a group that's re-engaged themselves to be able to take over the management if it happens. But there's two of them that have excellent properties for this. They're right in the perfect locations, and they want to do something, but they're afraid. And we've talked to them a little bit. I've engaged with them as much as I can. I'm trying to get them closer to that finish line, but is there any help available for that?
Honestly, the best thing you can do is a city-initiated rezoning of their lands. City can initiate the rezoning, get the table set for what you and they would like to see on that site. Encourage you as much as possible. I know every density means different things in different places, but to maximize the density, and obviously we're not talking about towers in Lake Country, but 3, 4, 5-story building, whatever your OCP envisions. But doing a city-initiated rezoning of their site or sites, and then same answer that I gave to the City of Trail, come and see us and let's get those zone sites up on the BC Build's Housing Development Opportunities platform. Doesn't exist yet, coming soon. And then let's see what's out there. And that's the best way, because the risk is off of the development community because the land is zoned, and the risk is off the landowner because somebody who knows what they're doing is going to come in and put in a proposal to develop on their land. So that's my recommendation to you and to others. If there are community-owned land in your city, I know it's a bit unconventional to have a city-initiated rezoning of those sites, but it's fully legitimate and well within city's authority. Do that city-initiated rezoning, and then that helps. Then come our way.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
All right, next question. Is an airspace parcel ownership sufficient for this program?
Yes. Yeah, that's what we're finding on some of the projects, like the one that I showed you. Actually, I can't remember if the Catalyst one is going to airspace parcel, but there's another one that we're working on, not announced yet, where there's a municipality. They've interestingly already built a fire hall, and they built it in such a way to allow for housing on top in the future. Well, the future is now, apparently, and so that it will be the housing society will lease an airspace parcel above the fire hall from the municipality.
Wonderful. All right. We have a comment in from City Spaces Consulting. Thank you for a great presentation. We're hoping you can speak to the details of layering with CHF and other BC funding programs.
So layering with other BC funding programs is not appropriate. You can bring in the BC funding once. So that's just for clarity around that. Unless, I guess, one proviso, but this is almost irrelevant, but unless there's a very large site and you want to do a BC Builds building on one site, or one portion of the site, and then a community housing fund building on another portion of the site, that's fine, but that's in essence 2 separate projects. So on one project, you can't layer BC funding onto BC funding. In terms of layering in Canada's Affordable Housing Fund, or using some of the city's Housing Accelerator money to bring in, that's fine. I guess the how would be similar to the question I answered earlier about in that instance, let's just take the Affordable Housing Fund, which again, for those who haven't caught up with all the changes to the acronyms, that used to be COI, the Co-Investment Fund. In that instance, BC Builds would provide grant funding to get projects 20% of units to 20% below market, and then AHF would come in with their per unit grant amount, and then they would handle the financing This might be a bit too much detail, but with the Affordable Housing Fund program, we are able to start the construction financing if CMHC isn't quite ready yet, and then they can come and do, like, take out the construction loan sometime during construction.
Thank you. Next question. Are there thoughts around the management of the property and capacity building initiatives in that area? Building up new companies to manage the properties?
Great question. Can somebody or some bodies, I think there are a few, I think the Co-op Federation has one, but social enterprises as property managers, I think, is a business that can be spun out with the launch of BC Builds. We're not going to spin that out, but I think it's a great idea. There's definitely a need for it, because it just the BC Builds buildings, they're literally just like regular market apartment buildings. There's no ongoing operating subsidy. There are no supports. Basically, and I'm thinking back to the city of Trail, which is why I asked the question about, are there any private folks who can, you can own the building and just contract out the management of it to a private sector property management company, which is fine. You can do that. And I think there's a real opportunity in the sector for some social entrepreneur to say, hey, we're going to figure out how to make money by helping to manage some of these BC Builds buildings. So I don't know about capacity building. My belief is that there actually already is capacity in this province for that kind of innovation. And somebody is going to kind of tune into, hey, I'm going to start a social enterprise property management company. There probably are already some. I know that, as I said, BC Co-op Federation has one. There are probably others that I don't know about, but I do think it's an opportunity. And if you are a municipality or a landowner that is not interested in starting a housing society and that doesn't have a nonprofit that would be able to operate a building, maybe start planting the seeds about a social enterprise that could spring up to do that work.
Amazing. Is there a minimum requirement for percentage of residential versus non-residential square footage of a project?
Great question. Yes. So BC Builds can construction finance projects that have a non-residential component that doesn't exceed 30%. So 30% of the building can be non-residential, the rest has to be residential. And really importantly, though, the pro forma has to work. So the non-residential space has to be able to carry itself. So there would need to be some rental income, or in a couple of the cases, like the City of North Vancouver one, for example, actually, and the Gibsons one. Well, all three of them that I showed, they all have non-residential. The City of North Vancouver is paying for its own neighborhood house. So yeah, we can construction finance, but the carrying costs of the non-residential space have to cover themselves.
Also, just wanted to take a moment there to appreciate all your wonderful questions and your engagement. It's very enriching and valuable to everybody present here. I do recognize that we also have around 15 minutes left, so we will try and answer as many as possible here. And if we can't, we'll maybe, Lisa, I can send them to you via email afterwards, and we can work together to answer the remaining questions. All right, moving on. Another question here from City Spaces. We're also hoping you can provide examples of what assistance for expediting municipal approvals will look like in practice. Funding timelines don't always translate to municipalities having the resources to condense review time.
Well, that goes back to that rocket ship that I talked about. The municipalities at the table. They're sitting there with us as a project partner from the beginning, and because they're there and because they need housing, they've identified a need for housing in their own communities. They're motivated and inspired to move quickly. So it really, BC Builds, it's a bottom-up, community-driven, community-led approach. We're going to go where the energy is. Obviously well, not obviously, I was the mayor of Victoria for 8 years. That's obviously not obvious to everyone, and had the opportunity to work very closely with municipal staff in my own municipality, saw how hard they worked and how creative they could be. And that is now the experience that I'm having with all the municipalities we're working with across the province, even when they're not the landowner. There are some instances where the church owns the land, but the municipality, they've dedicated a planner to the project and they're in there at the beginning. And what we're finding is it's actually less work for that planner to be at the table than if they had to, have inquiries and, look at the development permit outside of them. So it's, I recognize how hard municipal staff work and how limited resources are in municipalities. And that's why we've set this up in this way. So the expediting happens because the city or town or district is at the table with us. We don't just march into their planning office and say, you must go quickly.
Next question here. Do the approved projects need to follow BC Housing construction or design guidelines and also their claim process?
Claim process, yes. Design guidelines, no. So BC builds, again, just regular market rental buildings that happen to be owned by the community housing sector. They need to be built to building code. That's what we require, not the BC Housing design guidelines. But in terms of claims process, yeah, the rest of the process, and I'm assuming that means, well, I don't want to assume, but like a reimbursement process. Maybe the person could explain a bit more what they mean by claims. I mean,
Yeah, sorry. Hi. My name is Kelly Lind. So I'm the claim process. What I'm referring to. So BC Housing have very strict, a very particular way of doing procurement. Sorry, not just procurement. So in terms of claiming, so from pre-construction to post-construction, they have a different way of processing in comparison to CMHC. I'm just wondering if this is for a BC Build project, we will need to follow that as well.
yes, yeah, I don't think it would be different. Part of the reason why there's a rigorous claims process, and sorry, just, you mean like when you're claiming for reimbursement or like a construction draw and you need,
Yes.
Yeah, no, that will all remain the same. These are public funds, and so we have to be highly meticulous about the process. It is unfortunate that it's different from CMHC, and we're working to try and harmonize some things with CMHC in terms of construction draw process. But yeah, it will, the process will be the same as it is now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your question, Kelly. Next question here. Does BC Builds provide pre-development funds?
Yes, but quite discriminately. This is a tricky one because I know that projects can't go anywhere without pre-development funding. And also, if we gave pre-development funding to everyone on the screen and everyone who's not on the screen, our pre-development budget would be exhausted in about 1 second. So pre-development funding comes at a point, usually, but not always, but usually where zoning is in place and the funding is used to get from zoning to development permit. We don't provide that early feasibility, pre-feasibility funding, but CMHC now has additional seed funding. They've got a call open, and the Van City Community Foundation for those who are in Van City's catchment area. So there are other opportunities for seed funding. Our PDF funding really comes at a point where those steering committees are being set up. And we're all committed to working in earnest to get the project to construction quickly. So yes, with those provisions.
Is the program focused on rental, or could there be opportunity for partnerships with the Habitat for Humanity and their affordable ownership model, which can include secondary suites?
To start, it's focused on rental. That's the mandate we have right now from government. I think we've heard the minister and others speak publicly that a home ownership program is coming. so we'll be working on developing something with government in terms of, I'd like it to be called a Pathways to Homeownership program, because there are many pathways. Habitat for Humanity is one pathway. Purchasing units from strata developers at a below market rate is another. There may be many different pathways to homeownership, but that will come a little bit down the road.
Wonderful. Next question's from Ian. Can you outline the process for becoming a BC Builds project? How well developed does the project have to be? For example, is land concept initial pro forma sufficient?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. Zoning is also good. We because we're trying to de-risk these projects and move them quickly, it would be good to have some sense of the zoning being in place or at least close. And then the other thing that really makes a BC Builds project is that shared commitment of all the partners to getting from that concept stage to construction quickly. So and the other thing that's really important, this is admittedly potentially a bit of a struggle, a bit of a shift for the sector. These are middle income homes, and the nonprofit sector is not used to, for the most part. I mean, Tom Armstrong from the Community Land Trust says it so well, or the BC Co-op Federation, don't confuse rent with tenure. Right? Just because market rents are being charged or near market rents are being charged, the tenure of the building, the fact that it's in nonprofit hands matters. But I think there's going to be need to be a shift, getting comfortable servicing, as was the case in the 60s and 70s when these co-ops were built, getting comfortable servicing the middle income. So that also is a key qualification. We get inquiries, can I build housing for low-income seniors? Can I build housing for, and the answer is yes, but not through BC Builds. There are other BC housing funding streams. So I think that's another key criteria, is really kind of in your bones, feeling comfortable as a society and as a landowner that you are building for your teachers, for your nurses, for your construction workers, for your small business owners. Even though that's maybe a difficult decision to make, because there are also people in your community who are struggling to find homes at all. But there needs to be kind of a real gut check before coming into BC Builds about who the housing is being built for.
Next question is from Tia. Would a private landowner qualify to apply for BC Builds? We have a significant challenge to building and cost to build being rural, and we are limited with the builders to do bigger projects like this in our community.
Yeah, so BC Builds does have a private developer stream, and what we can offer to private developers is low-cost construction financing. Well below market, and that does, like, sometimes that's enough to tip a project from non-viability into viability. But in terms of grants and takeout financing, BC Builds can't provide those to private developers at this time. Tia has a follow-up.
Sorry. And can you put us in touch with someone that can do the build? That's CSU. We're struggling trying to find the people. There's someone that owns a big chunk of property and they want to develop it, but they're not capable to do the development itself. And they're going, how do we move this along? I've been trying to solicit people to come and develop here, but because it hasn't been done in decades, because of this and this and this, and it's 400 square foot because you can't get sub trades. It's really unrealistic. So how do we get builders or developers from other areas to come and help us?
This might be a bit far-fetched, but
Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, not your question. My answer. Your question's fine. My answer might be a bit far-fetched, or like not realistic. But I'm going to say it anyway because we'll see what happens. If the city itself can use its own land and take it, like as we discussed earlier, put it through that zoning process, put it up on the website that'll be launched in the future, this housing development opportunities, and attract a builder for your site, right?
Easy to move the project over.
Correct.
Because they're already here. They know how it works.
Correct.
They know what the
Correct.
system, they have the people in place.
And, you know, and when this opportunities page launches, each landowner gets an opportunity to fill out what we're calling a property opportunity notice. And you have to fill out like the zoning, blah, 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 blah. But then also there's an opportunity to provide any other additional information that might be interesting to a proponent. And in your case, you might say, you know, there's lots of land and trail after our site. So anyways,
that makes sense.
Could work. Oh, good. It's not far-fetched. Well, it might be far-fetched, but.
And I'm a realtor for my day job. So this for me is like, my brain's like, how do we put this together? How do we put the people and the places and make it happen?
Yeah. Another thing we're working on, this will be probably a couple years down the road, is to have standardized off-site construction, so that it will be really easy to have buildings built in factories that look and feel just like regular middle-income buildings, but can be constructed more cost effectively and constructed in factory and assembled on site. Still, of course, requires trades, but and then standardizing some of those designs so that they're easier and quicker to build.
Thanks, Tia. I believe this might be our final question for the day, given that we're almost on time here. Can this program be used for a project that is already in pre-development stage?
I guess so. I mean, it depends on where the project came from. So is the project, does it fit the other criteria? So is it targeted towards middle income households? Is it getting a piece of underutilized land into production for housing? So if it kind of answers yes to some of those questions, yeah, absolutely. We're getting lots of inquiries actually about projects that are already in pre-development. Again, because they're, you know, looking to get to construction quickly, which is part of our mandate as well. But it needs to fit with the program criteria.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa. Just going to wrap up our session here for today. And I recognize that there may still be some outstanding questions. I will reach out to everyone at the end of the session and provide you a resource where you could follow up with me. And hopefully we can find you the answers that you need. But on behalf of everyone, all the attendees and the participants, I thank you for your time and your engagement. And I think it's safe to say on behalf of everyone as well, thank you, Lisa, for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. The value that we receive, it continues to reproduce in tenfold. So thank you to you all. And we hope to see you in future online learning events. Please feel free to check out our calendar. There's more sessions like this there available. And yes, to anybody asking for the recording, I will be sending that out to you via email as well. So I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.